coming up on the flagpole in Newtown, Connecticut. The flagpole's right in the middle of the intersection, and for generations people have been saying, can we get that thing out of the middle of the intersection? Maybe put a street light or something up there to deal with the traffic. And you're going to basically see the best of humanity and the worst of humanity around this flagpole. You know, people letting other people in, people allowing people to get to work on time, you know, slowing down. And you see the opposite, people cutting in front of each other, it's kind of messy. It's a bit like democracy, right in the middle of the intersection. It takes a little accommodation, and the country is in a similar kind of situation as Newtown, where over and over again, the town decides, we're going to keep it right there. We're going to keep it right there. Head right down into the big hill that heads down to the Housatonic River. Housatonic is one of three great big rivers that run north and south in New England: the Hudson, the Housatonic, and the Connecticut rivers. I'm heading down Churchill Road in Newtown down into Sandy Hook. I'll be there in just a minute. Here's a little tributary that runs down into the Housatonic. It's called the Housatonic River. And it's a tiny little stream when it doesn't rain, but with the rain we're getting today, it can get quite swollen. And I want to show you something, because after the tragedy here, everyone was wondering, what do we do? How do we respond to this? And one of the things that happened was a really, really touching memorial that happened right on the shores of the Housatonic here. And right at this spot, a local artist took the time to memorialize the kids on stones by putting their names in a little blessing for each of the kids. So after it rains, I tend to come down here to try to clean it up a little bit. One of the things that happens after a huge tragedy like what happened here is the trauma, the loss, the horror of it all makes it feel like the river of life is going right by you. Somehow it throws you out of the flow of life. And the question is, what do we do to get back into the feeling alive again, feeling like we're part of life? And a big part of life, I think, is struggling to figure that out. How do we deal with what life throws at us? How do we get back into the river of life? A long time ago, I was in Israel, and I happened to run into two of my heroes at the time, still are my heroes. One of them was a wonderful man by the name of Dr. David Rue, and the other was a man by the name of Ali Nakjavani. Towering men of great principle, courage, loving kindness, and accomplishment. And I ran into Dr. Rue, and he asked me what I was doing that evening. I said, well, nothing. And he said, well, why don't you come over for dinner? Whoa, yes, absolutely, thank you. And so we made arrangements, and then some time later, I ran into Mr. Nakjavani. And he said, oh, Dr. Woodall. And I was so embarrassed because I was like 30-something, who am I? And he said, what are you doing this evening? And I thought, oh my God. And I said, well, I met Dr. Rue earlier, and he asked me over for dinner. And Mr. Nakjavani did this. He stopped, took a step back and said, Dr. Rue, there is a man who has suffered successfully. And I thought, suffered successfully? What the heck does that mean? I don't want to suffer at all. Why would he say something like that? But then I thought, what an accomplishment that is. And I don't want to suffer at all. So the rest of my life has basically been figuring out, how do I suffer successfully? What would success look like? What would it look like for me, for the country, for each of us? That's what healing the heart of America is about. How do we bring out the best in ourselves and each other as a result of what life hands us. Welcome to Healing the Heart of America. So let's get into the meat of it. Healing the heart of America is the goal. It's not casting blame on anybody. It's not pointing fingers. It's not making some partisan score. It's not trying to make somebody look bad or blame anybody. It's about healing the heart of America. That's the singular goal. That's number one. And then number two is we're starting from the understanding that life's not easy. And it's got an awful lot of challenges and suffering even. So we can suffer unsuccessfully, which is kind of what we're doing right now with division and blame and the tribalism and the oppression and all of that stuff. Or we can suffer successfully. Healing the heart of America is about mapping out what that looks like. How do we take the difficulties of our times and turn it into something successful for our lives? Let's map that out. That's number two. We're going to start talking about number 3, 4, and 5. Number 3, we're going to talk about in just a second, and it has to do with the kinds of identities we fall into when we suffer unsuccessfully and when we suffer successfully. And then 4 is going to be about the arenas of life that are most affected by, well, suffering badly and suffering well. And number 5, we're going to break it down into things we can do about it. And the form that healing the heart of America is going to take day to day. I'll show you in just a second. As is true of vet centers around the country, this one's tucked away almost as an embarrassment in a industrial area in Danbury. It's not on Main Street. It's not in a place where the general public can see it. Maybe that's for the better, to give the vets the chance to have their own private space. But you can see it's a pretty industrial looking building. Now, I wanted to ground our conversation with the experience of veterans because it illustrates so dramatically what this country's about and what it can be about. So I want to tell you a story that is going to illustrate a lot of what we'll be doing with healing the heart of America. It goes back to the early 2000s. I got a phone call from a buddy of mine, Phil Spicer, a professor at Lesley College, who was doing work with art therapy. Heart of gold, wonderful guy, bringing art into communities to heal communities. Wonderful idea. So he gives me a call and says, "John, we got to go to New York. New York's calling us." I thought, New York's calling us? How does New York call you? But I was in the middle of something. I said, "Phil, call me back later. I'm busy." So I get off the phone. He calls me back and said, "John, pay attention. New York's calling us. The mayor's office of New York City's calling us. We got to go down there. They want us to meet with a bunch of commissioners to talk about how to help the city and the city's kids in particular respond to 9/11. So, okay, let's go. So next morning we're in the car driving down to New York City from Boston, and we show up at the mayor's offices, sit around this big table with all these commissioners, and they ask us, what do we do? Does every kid in the city have to go to therapy? Are they all traumatized? Do we need to put resources into therapists? What do we do? And I said, well, there are going to be kids who really do need therapy, and maybe 15% of the kids in the city might need it. But if we try to focus all the kids in the city into the existing mental health services
it's going to collapse because it's already overloaded. It's already underserviced. And besides, if we defined what's going on with the kids as mental illness, we've pathologized them, we've disempowered them, and we've made it so that they can't move forward without a therapist. We need something different. We need a different way to think about this. We need to think about this in terms of resilience. How do we take what's happened and bring out from it the strengths that kids possess? And then how do we use those strengths to unite the kids? Because the last thing we need in the most diverse city in the world is conflict between peoples. I said, so let me illustrate. And I said, the example I want to give you is the example of a veteran of the Vietnam War, let's say. And they weren't quite sure how that related to 9/11 and the task of helping kids build resilience. And I said, well, just give me a few minutes to lay out the story. And said, imagine an 18-year-old young man who in 1967 is drafted. And it's right at the age at which he's thinking, well, how do I do something bigger than myself? How do I do something to give my life meaning? I'm willing to even sacrifice myself for these big ideas of liberty and democracy and protecting the innocent. Okay, I'll sign up and I'm going to be a Marine. So he goes to boot camp, Camp Lejeune. 6 weeks later, he's in a rice paddy in South Vietnam. And it turns out it's not looking quite like he thought. In one of his first briefings with his lieutenant, and his platoon's going to go out on a patrol, their first LRP, long-range patrol. And the lieutenant says to the company, you know, you guys, I got to prepare you for what we're walking into. There have been these incidents recently where villagers will come out to greet the platoons, and it looks like they're holding gifts or food or a baby. Turns out once they get close to us, they're holding a bomb or they're holding a weapon. And we've lost a lot of soldiers this way. So if anybody approaches us, these are the words in Vietnamese to say, stop right there or we'll shoot. And then the platoon practices how to say that. So they go out on their long-range patrol, and sure enough, they come into a village, and this older woman starts coming out with what looks like a baby, and everyone's shouting these words in Vietnamese, stop or we'll shoot, stop or we'll shoot. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So now, what does being in a situation like this as an 18-year-old young man, where you're there because you think you're protecting democracy, you're protecting the innocent, you're defending liberty, and you're in situations where it seems like the roll of the dice about whether you're killing a civilian or protecting the platoon. It's an impossible dilemma. So what happens as a result of this and repeated incidents like this is that your sense of the goals in life, the things you're aspiring to, defending democracy, protecting the innocent, defending liberty, those go out the window because that doesn't seem to be like anything like what you're actually doing. So this notion of a noble goal in life that you could devote your life to is broken. And then what happens next is I've done things that I never imagined I could do. I didn't think I would be in situations where civilians would be injured, let alone killed, or let alone me being involved. And it turns out that most of the casualties in war are civilians. So now this sense of who this young man is, his identity, the way he identifies himself, that's crushed also. He no longer sees himself as a good person, someone who could be worthy of striving for a noble goal. And now how does he get motivated to do anything when he has been robbed of a goal that seems noble and worthy? And he feels now, I'm a fraud. I thought I was this good person, but I'm not. I've done horrible things. And now his motivation is paralyzed. Now it's time for him to go home, and he had a sweetheart, a woman he was hoping to marry. How does he share with her the most intimate part of his life. And the most powerful experience he's had isn't his love for her or his spiritual life or his religious conversion. His biggest experience in life is horror and profound shame and terror. How does he now relate the deepest part of himself to another human being? So now isolation grips his heart and his social relations. These are huge dilemmas. How someone responds to this, for many of our veterans, defines the rest of their lives. And I've outlined it in basic terms as 3 responses. This gets back to suffering successfully, suffering unsuccessfully. Left unaided, people who tend to respond to life with one or the other of the fight or flight mechanisms. They're wired more towards fleeing and anxiety, or they're wired more for anger and fighting. Let's take the fleeing part first. So now my goals in life have been destroyed. My sense of who I am has been destroyed. My motivation is destroyed, and I feel utterly isolated and outside of the flow of life, like I'm not worthy of being in it, and I feel like I've been cast out of it. I call this a weakened identity. It's hard to engage any idea about goals in life that are worthwhile, or that I'm worthwhile, or that I can be connected in any meaningful way with other people, or be motivated to do so. So I call that a weakened identity. And the opposite would be someone who's not motivated by how did I contribute to this horrible thing, but how did you contribute to this horrible thing? And they look for someone to blame. They look for someone who disrupted their life and did these horrible things, and they need to pay, right? And you kind of fall into groups that are looking for a bad guy, right? And so now you're highly motivated to pursue the goal of dominance over those bad guys, whether they're bad or not. Instead of it mobilizing the best part of your character, it mobilizes the part of you that wants to dominate, that wants to destroy someone else, that is quick to label someone evil or bad, and is now highly motivated to do so. And I call this the rigid identity. So in talking to the people in New York City, these commissioners, I said, the last thing we need in the most diverse city of the world is the kids of the city to fall into one of these 2 categories of a rigid identity, where they're looking for someone to blame, where that takes the form of, one gang fighting another gang, one ethnic group fighting another ethnic group, or religion, or a national background fighting each other. And the weakened identities in the community being the victims. The last thing the most diverse city in the world needs is that to happen. And that will happen unless we marshal our resources to prevent it. And they said, well, how do we do that? We can't have that. And I said, well, there's a third option, the third identity, the successful suffering option. And that's forming a compassionate identity, where the goal is turning this suffering into something that unites us all, that brings compassion and an expansion of our identity, not a shrinking of our identity and making it more rigid, but an expanded identity where we see the value of all of us together, that this suffering brings us together and needs to bring out the best in ourselves and each other, and that we're motivated to do that, and that we unite the kids around demonstrating that in one way or another. So the compassionate identity is what we need to be nurturing. So for the next 6 years, Phil and I worked with the Department of Youth and Community Development in New York City to develop the Healing Arts Project, which was part of the Unity Project and a couple other organizations that we founded, to cultivate the experience of the compassionate identity. Now, interestingly, there was no uptick in violence or in ethnic conflict or gang violence after 9/11, which we might have predicted. I don't know if we had anything to do with that. I'd like to think that we did. But healing the heart of America is taking that to a larger scale. We need to cultivate the compassionate identity in this generation of kids, especially, all of us, but the kids in particular. So what we'll talk about next is how. No self-respecting adult is going to be out on a day like today. It's raining, sometimes pouring, but this is one of my happy places. And I wanted to take you here to give you an overview of the 5 themes that we're going to be demonstrating this successful suffering and the healing the heart of America through. That stream I showed you just a little bit earlier starts from this fall at the pond, heads down that way to where we just were. But there's that idea again of the river of life. How do we get back into it? How does the country get back into being whole and taking part, participating in the river of life without the division that's sinking us? So what we're going to do with the Healing the Heart of America is focus on 5 areas that we can have influence. You know, Archimedes, the famous Greek mathematician and philosopher, he invented the lever. And he said, give me a fulcrum, a pole, and a place to stand, and I'll move the world. So where's our place to stand? What's the fulcrum we can use to affect the world, to help it through these dark times? How do we create that compassionate identity? We're going to at least make an effort towards it with these 5 areas. And they are, number 1, the programming that we'll be hosting on YouTube, on our podcast, on Instagram, Facebook, on Mondays, on interfaith challenges and cooperation. We're going to call it the Tree of Life. Now, religion is really problematic, isn't it? It's a source of a lot of conflict. It's a source of a lot of oppression. It's a source of death and killing. But it's also the source of upliftment and the unfolding of the best in human nature. So there's a baby in that really dirty bathwater. The challenge of Mondays, of the Tree of Life, is going to be, how do we identify and bring out the opportunities for the best that religious practices offer us? And how do we discard the dirty bathwater of division and arrogance and colonialism and racism and oppression that is the worst of religion? So Mondays is going to be an exploration of that. And we've already got some wonderful people lined up who can talk about this challenge. We're not pretending to have all the answers or even some of the answers. What we're trying to do is have an open and honest discussion. This is a time, chaotic times in society are the time for envisioning. What I mean by that is that what the system sciences show us is that small efforts, small inputs into a chaotic system can have profound effects down line. And there's that analogy that maybe you've heard of a butterfly landing on a branch in Indonesia causing a hurricane in North America. It's an analogy to say that in a chaotic time, small inputs can have dramatic and powerful effects. So in this chaotic time in the world and in the country, we want to be envisioning the best possible future for ourselves and for our kids and our kids' kids. Mondays, we'll be looking at the interfaith contributions to that idea. Tuesdays will be for the arts and transformation. How have the arts throughout history been the vehicle for this envisioning a future worth living in, giving representation to the best of human nature and bringing it out for the creation of culture? Art needs to be a central piece of this envisioning process, because art in itself is an exploratory process. It's an inquisitive process. So Tuesdays will be devoted to arts and transformation. And the name of these programs on Tuesday will be the Athena Project. Wednesdays will be devoted to exploring the value of our diversity in a united community. You know, people who say that they're just for unity and they don't want to hear anything about our diversity, that's not unity, that's uniformity. And people who just want to talk about our diversity without seeing the overarching unity between us, that can be divisive or certainly ineffective. We want to look at the dynamic between unity and diversity in our culture, in our thinking, and in the way we organize ourselves. So this is going to be called E Pluribus Unum, from many one. This is the motto of the United States. And in the 1700s, at the time of the Revolution, E Pluribus Unum meant colonies. From many colonies comes one nation. Well, it's come to mean a lot more since then. And we need to re-envision what it means, what the peoples and cultures and religious backgrounds, non-religious backgrounds, how do we redefine unity in the context of the profound diversity in the country 250 years after its founding? This project on Wednesdays will be called E Pluribus Unum, and at least 50% of the programming will be devoted to discussions about and demonstrations of the process of racial healing. One of the features of the rigid and weakened identity is that our mind tends to take information and weigh it against things we already believe, instead of opening up to the possibilities of learning and being inquisitive. We approach the world with all the answers, and we're not in an inquisitive learning mode. Finding out the truth is less important to us than proving what we think we already know. This is really bad for social organization and communities. Here comes the rain. This is why no self-respecting adult is out on a day like today. But this idea of being open to the world, learning together, being open to the idea of examining one's bias and rooting it out, and approaching the world with critical thinking, learning the skills of critical thinking by yourself and together, is absolutely necessary to solve the complex problems in the world and to be successful in life. This shows itself most directly in the sciences and technology and in our problem solving. So Thursdays is going to be devoted to critical thinking, the sciences and technology to help us along the way of our unity. And we're going to call Thursdays the science of hope. Fridays is going to be putting it all together. How do we take these ideas and apply them to strengthening couples, strengthening their ability to parent their kids, to prepare them for a very chaotic world in which they have to play a part in the healing of the planet? How do we bring these principles to strengthen families, to strengthen neighborhoods, communities, the nation, and the world? It all boils down to all of these principles we've mentioned, plus how we talk to each other, the styles in which we solve problems together. How do we find creative and cooperative ways to use language to solve the enormously complex problems of the world, and find ways to find solutions to complex problems that are based on the diverse inputs of many different backgrounds that we might not have imagined. We need this kind of creative ability, and our kids in particular need to learn them. So Fridays will be called 21st Century Conversations and will be devoted to these kinds of conversations. We're very excited about what we've already got put together. Every single day of the week, we'll have a fresh interview, conversation with people who are expert in any one of these areas. And experts might be you, might be people you know, might be a 12-year-old, might be someone with an advanced degree, might be someone doing something that nobody knows about. So popularity is not going to be the standard. The standard is going to be who's thinking creatively to put into practice these principles. All right, friends, we look forward to your contributions to healing the heart of America. And please know that your voice is welcome. And if you have any inputs you want to give us about people or organizations or initiatives that you or someone you know is doing, let us know. Let's get them up and let's get the word out to them. Thanks for spending some of your time with us on the first broadcast of Healing the Heart of America. We're looking forward to your thoughts and what you're doing, the interesting things that you know people around you are doing, what you'd like to do to heal this country. We've got content going up on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on your favorite podcast channel. Mondays is the Tree of Life. Tuesdays, the Athena Project. And on Wednesdays, you're welcome to join us for E Pluribus Unum. Thursdays is the Science of Hope. Fridays, 21st Century Conversations, where we bring it all together in homes, neighborhoods, and communities for the healing of our country. Remember, friends, we need each other.